Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the US EPA Landfill Methane Outreach Program for a webinar today. My name is Ellen Meyer. We're so pleased to have you join us for this webinar on the University of California's renewable natural gas projects. Today's webinar will feature two speakers, Sam Schabacker with the University of California and Nick Stork with Archaea Energy. The speakers will each present, and then we will have time at the end of the webinar for questions and a brief wrap-up. We'll be posting the presentations from today as well as a recording of this webinar on our website as quickly as we are able. Our first speaker is Sam Schabacker. Sam leads biogas origination for the University of California. UC has developed both a landfill gas processing plant and procured biogas via long-term offtake contracts as part of its ambitious goal to be carbon neutral by 2025. Sam will discuss both models and how biogas fits into UC's comprehensive carbon neutrality strategy. Thanks for joining us today, Sam.
Thanks for having us, Ellen, and a big thanks to you and Lauren and the rest of the LMOP team, as well as Nick from Archaea and everyone that's listening in today. So again, my name is Sam Schabacker. I work in the energy unit at the UC Office of the President. I'm responsible for biogas procurement and origination for the UC system. And I wanted to cover three things today. One is background on UC, University of California. Two, our carbon neutrality goal. We have an ambitious goal to hit carbon neutrality by 2025. And three, the role that renewable natural gas or biomethane or biogas, I'll use them all interchangeably today, the role that RNG plays in our carbon neutrality goals. So you go to the next slide, please. So just to give a little background on the University of California or UC, I put our mission statement there at the top of the slide. And really our goal is to advance and improve the lives of people in California around the world through our research, our educational opportunities, our healthcare, and our agricultural expertise. And as you can see, the UC system is fairly extensive. There's 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, and 3 nationally affiliated labs. We're the third largest employer in the state of California, and we contribute $82 billion annually in economic output to the state of California. So in addition to all of these great things that UC brings to the state, let's go to the next slide, please. Through our activities, we generate a fairly large carbon footprint, a little over 1 million metric tons per year in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And a huge portion of the Scope 1 emissions comes from combusting fossil natural gas at our cogeneration units and our boilers that are located in many of these locations at our 10 campuses and 5 medical centers. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is a breakout of our Scope 1 emissions, and it really gives you a sense, almost 2/3 of the Scope 1 emissions come from this natural gas combustion. So this is really the challenge that when we think about carbon neutrality, the University of California, in all of these sectors, natural gas looms large in how we address this topic. Go to the next slide, please. So in 2013, the entire UC system set out to chart a course toward carbon neutrality by 2025. And if you go to the next slide, we wanted this goal to really be consistent with our mission and fundamentally to help UC be responsible for developing scalable solutions to build a low carbon future, one that's predicated upon the research that comes out of our world-class institutions. Next slide, please. And so the guiding framework was really these 4 points. One, we wanted it to reflect our core mission around research, teaching, and public service. 2, we need to do it in a financially responsible way, safeguarding the public trust as a public entity. 3, we wanted to provide tangible environmental and social benefits. And finally, we wanted to optimize our existing and future campus infrastructure. So that's the framework that we use to implement the plan. So if you go to the next slide, please. Over a whole series of meetings and workshops with our stakeholders, UC developed a comprehensive approach to how we get to carbon neutrality by 2025. And you see it embodied here in this upside down triangle. So the most transformative and longest lasting solutions for emissions reductions are at the top. And so to start there, the first is just as we plan for our future, that's things like transit-oriented development or LEED certification in our buildings, really making sure that as we grow, we're doing so in a smart and thoughtful way to minimize our carbon impact. The second is for existing buildings and operations looking to reduce our emissions. And so that could come in the form of energy efficiency retrofits in our existing building stock. That's really the demand side of this equation. The third bucket is replace. And so this is the supply side, and this is where biogas fits in. So we have sought to replace our higher carbon forms of energy, so electricity and natural gas, with lower carbon forms, so renewable solar and wind, as well as carbon neutral biogas. That's where these fit in. And then finally, the last leg of the stool is mitigation. So for those items that we can't plan, reduce, or replace away from a carbon neutrality perspective, we're looking to mitigate with offsets. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is an example of, on the replace bucket, the wide breadth and depth of renewable energy, electricity-specific deals that UC has done. There's over 100 of them. On-site, off-site, PPA, self-supply, REC deals. UC is, in fact, per the EPA's own calculation, the largest purchaser of green power amongst universities in the country. And so I share the slide just to show that, you know, we're really eager at UC to put in place deals that will advance this carbon neutrality goal. So we're not afraid to transact. We need to do so and want to do so in a smart way that advances UC's interests, but also makes these projects viable. Part of our direction under the Carbon Neutrality Initiative is to help develop the market and show leadership in doing so. So we're not afraid to do deals. If you go to the next slide, please. So speaking more specifically about biogas, there's really two models for how biogas fits into UC. And I guess maybe to dive into details a little bit more about why biogas is an important part of UC's carbon neutrality strategy. First, when we go out and look for projects at UC to pursue biogas projects, we use a pretty thorough analysis, part of which includes an additionality test. So we're looking for methane from biogenic sources that was previously being flared or vented into the atmosphere. And we want to take that gas and we want to put it to useful, beneficial work so that we can avoid the methane and the high global warming potential of that molecule and put it into useful activity for our campuses. So that has traditionally meant that we have pursued gas that's being flared or vented from a landfill, or an anaerobic digestion process that's taking source separated organics such as food waste and putting them into an AD before it goes to a landfill. So trying to divert waste that's also consistent with our sustainability mission. All of this methane that we're able to capture from biogenic sources displaces fossil natural gas and can be a drop-in replacement for the cogen units and the boilers at all of our campuses and medical centers. And this is really critical for the capital planning cycle, as our energy managers and our financial planners are trying to make decisions 10, 20, 30 years into the future, and they're looking at a huge infrastructure investment in the form of a cogen and thinking about payback periods and debt service and what does this mean for campus expansion. Being able to have that asset in place and knowing, you know, what its lifespan is really critical as our campuses plan and think about the future. And then the second to last bullet that I want to touch on is resiliency in a climate change world. So I want to share a little story about how cogens running off of carbon neutral fuel, biomethane, can be a really critical piece to how we confront and reliably provide power and services for our campuses. So as many of you know, in California, because of the risk of catastrophic wildfires, increasingly the state has taken on a policy of shutting off the power during high wind events or high fire risk events, specifically in the fall. And so this happened both in 2018 and 2019 in the area around UC Berkeley, where the entire community had their power turned off for multiple days at a time. Our cogeneration unit was able to ramp up and provide power to portions of campus so that, for example, critical research that had been gathered over years and years that was really priceless could be protected. And so we really see the ability to provide a carbon neutral fuel in biomethane to provide resiliency as our climate is changing is absolutely essential. This is decarbonized resiliency. So if you go to the next slide, please. UC has been really pursuing two types of models for our biomethane program. The first, this is a photo of a gas processing plant that UC commissioned and built and now is involved with the operation of in Shreveport, Louisiana. So we issued debt in order to build this facility, and we take landfill gas and we put it through this plant so we can clean out all the impurities, get it to pipeline spec, and then inject it into the pipeline. So this is a really unique project because UC is a public entity. We've effectively worn the developer hat. So we're familiar with looking at gas spec information, dealing with warranty issues on corroding compressors, having to think through a lot of the optimization questions around the raw biogas that comes in. So we have had a unique perspective on what it takes to run a facility like this, what some of the pros and cons are, and what some of the opportunities are to scale this type of a model. So if you go to the next slide, please. The second type of model that we've used is just as a pure offtake, right? So basically a PPA for biomethane. We are signing 10 to 20-year deals for biomethane from, again, sources that are cap and trade eligible, that meet the additionality test and are consistent with UC's carbon neutrality goals. And so in these sorts of deals, and this is one actually is the press release that just went out last fall that highlights a recent partnership that we signed up with Archaea Energy for taking gas at a landfill in San Bernardino County, California, which is in Southern California. And so this has really been a good opportunity for us to meet several developers in the space, and it's helped clarify, what we're looking for in a partner. So many of these projects, because we know how hard they are to build and to operate, it's like a 10 to 20-year marriage. This is a deep relationship that requires really open communication through equipment malfunctions, as regulations change, as the RIN market goes on a roller coaster, right? It goes up, it goes down. We need partners who can problem solve with us, who can communicate, who can take the initiative to troubleshoot and make sure these projects work well. And Archaea has really been that with us. And so we look forward to doing more projects with them to get more carbon neutral biomethane and to also expanding those partnerships. One of the great things about these long-term partnerships from a UC perspective is that UC has investment grade credit. So even as the RIN market goes up and it goes down, UC is going to be bankable. We're going to be able to continue paying our bills, which is really important as getting contracted cash flows to make these projects financeable. So if you go to the next slide, please. When we look out into the future, University of California, we're moving in on our volumetric goal for biomethane. We are continuing to buy new supply. We're looking for cap and trade eligible supplies. So what I would say is if there are developers or gas rights owners who are listening in today and want to get in touch and have ideas or have opportunities, my contact information will be at the very end, and I'm always happy to chat. I alluded some of this on what the benefits are of working with UC. We're a long-term fixed price off-taker. We have excellent credit. There's this fantastic story being a leading research institution. So, the story of providing carbon neutral fuel to keep the lights on even as the climate changes, decarbonized resiliency is a wonderful story that we like to be able to promote. And then finally, we're open to innovative deal structures. So different ways to structure the pricing or the volumes or some of the commercial terms. We recognize that each of these projects is different and we want to do deals. We want to bring projects online. We need to do so in a way that is cost competitive and makes sense for the university. But we also understand a lot of what goes into these projects. So we can be quite a nimble and sophisticated counterparty. So with that, if you go to the last slide, please. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or you'd like to discuss opportunities. We're always happy to chat, and I just really want to thank everyone for being part of this and listening in on University of California's efforts to be a leader in helping to scale the biomethane industry and how we're using it to reach our carbon neutrality goals by 2025. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Our next speaker today is Nick Stork with Archaea Energy. Archaea is currently developing 8 renewable natural gas projects across the United States. Nick is also the co-founder and CFO of Noble Environmental Incorporated, which owns and operates 2 landfills in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. Noble self-developed an LFG to RNG plant, which became the model for Archaea's development. Thanks for being with us today, Nick.
Thank you, Ellen. So it's we can say Archaea or Archaea. It's kind of a tomato thing, but we'll go with Archaea today. So, but I apologize if I slip in an Archaea every once in a while. We can go to the next slide, please. So as Ellen mentioned in her introduction, my experiences in solid waste management, or kind of my near-term experiences in solid waste management, and from that experience, we had developed the idea that a modern sanitary landfill, post subtitle D with good environmental controls, could really be a renewable energy facility. And it was, instead of how most people used to think of landfills, which is just a garbage dump. We really thought of it actually as a big digester, which are kind of all the rage these days. And that's especially true if you get the gas collection efficiency up and the residual waste outputs down. But it's even better than a digester because it's more tolerant of waste mixes and more capable of delivering predictable energy over the long run. And also what's great about it is that the infrastructure is largely already there. So we really think that, we have this fundamental idea that landfills are valuable energy resources. And they're valuable energy resources that can really be much further optimized. And so what I mean by that is minimizing waste outputs and conserving everything that could be conserved and generating predictable energy outputs for a really long period of time. So we had this idea after experience at our landfill that we could do this at scale and we could do it a lot better. And we had learned a lot of lessons through that process. So we've really tried to seek out and find the best people in the industry and to somehow convince them to be part of our team. So it's an incredible team that we've assembled that has a number of years of gas processing experience. And we're really standing on the shoulders of giants like Charlie Anderson, our head of gas processing, who's been a key enabler for the industry and has worked on so many of these successful early renewable natural gas high BTU projects. We have been related to technology and innovation. We have ambitious plans to optimize this landfill energy system and deliver clean and consistent RNG using the lowest cost, highest methane recovery, lowest carbon intensity methods. So we really want to optimize this energy system, and we are making investments in CO2 capture and sequestration, heat recovery, and looking at RNG to hydrogen as well, and have some of those projects in our pipeline. None of our long-term plans are possible without predictable RNG pricing. We have a philosophy not to take too much risk on things that we can't control. So our business model is a little different than other developers. We're really trying to find long-term decarbonization partners for each project. And instead of selling environmental attributes at the spot, variable price, and kind of hoping for the best, we're really trying to deliver a product to our customers and delight our customers in that process, give them something that they need over a long period of time. So the offtake partner, like the University of California, is really critical to the project. Just like the landfill operator is critical to the project. Our customers of RNG are totally important stakeholders. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but regarding RNG development, we think it has to change. We need to develop manufacturing approach to RNG development. We need to have better uptime, better recovery, lower costs, lower time to commercial operation state. Our plants also have to be more flexible of inlet gas qualities, and we have to anticipate tighter and tighter product gas specifications. So we have ambitious goals there to really radically improve RNG development across all those different important metrics. Next slide, please. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. You know, this is sort of a very elementary graphic depiction of a particular project that we're working on. So phase one of the project that's outlined on the left here will be, you know, a great RNG plant at low cost with some proprietary approaches to gas upgrading. We're designing it for really high uptime, you know, 96% plus, high methane recovery, approximately 95%, and high flexibility. So, you know, capable of operating and meeting pipeline spec at various levels of inlet oxygen and inlet nitrogen and methane percentage. So we're also trying to maximize this system, right? And like I talked about earlier, we're trying to make use of waste heat from our plant thermal oxidizer. The annotation didn't show up in this version of the presentation, but on the bottom right that shows a little leachate evaporation graphic. So we're taking 40,000 gallons per day of wastewater from the landfill and removing that burden from an old municipal wastewater treatment plant. And we're doing it with the only input in that is by utilizing waste heat from our plant, from our high destruction efficiency thermal oxidizer. So I think that's sort of an example of what we try to do kind of across every level of our project, is really utilizing every waste output as possible and trying to improve the overall efficiency of the system. So to that end, we're also working on permitting a Class 6 CO2 sequestration well. So landfill gas is about 35% CO2. And instead of taking that through a thermal oxidizer and having that be part of our emissions, we are going to sequester it. And the geology in this particular project is very supportive of a great CO2 sequestration project for large volumes of our CO2. And the other thing we're doing, or two other things we're doing on this project, is the landfill wants on an on-site CNG station, which is depicted in that big square out of the bottom left, and they want to convert their diesel trash hauling fleet to CNG, which will represent a significant reduction in emissions, of their own emissions, and improvement in air quality for the landfill and the hauling company. And we'll work with our friends from Clean Energy to help us build an on-site CNG fueling station there as well. And then lastly, we'd like to do as kind of a phase 2 or phase 3 of the project, on-site solar, to further reduce our carbon intensity. There's about 45 acres of capped enclosed area on this landfill that are perfectly situated for on-site solar, and there's another industrial warehouse that would be great for rooftop solar as well. So really try to think holistically about carbon intensity reduction, cost reduction, and kind of energy system optimization. And then on the right, you know, we think that this is a kind of a map of, I think we have 9 projects on this map in development. So a lot of these projects have kind of complementary systems approach to development that you're seeing on the left. We're also looking at RNG to hydrogen on a couple of projects that we're excited about. And we have some potential digester projects that are not quite as far along as the landfill projects. Next slide. So this is kind of an example of some of the greenhouse gas reduction that we're potentially bringing to our offtake partners. So we actually have several projects where we're working on tier 2 sites, which are not under NSPS and don't have GCCS. So there's no active gas collection system and they're venting methane. And so we're we're installing a well field, we're installing a high collection efficiency well field, capturing all the methane or all the landfill gas rather, and taking it to a high BTU RNG plant. And then on top of that, we're adding CO2 sequestration. So the before and after CO2 equivalent greenhouse gas reduction is really compelling, really impactful in this particular project. But even looking at a project that already had an active gas collection system with a 97% destruction efficiency flare, we're still, on an average project looking at, north of 25,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent a year in terms of greenhouse gas reductions. And we work really hard to try to maximize the GHG reductions because that's what our stakeholders care about. Folks like the University of California who will be receiving these environmental or these greenhouse gas reductions. We're trying to optimize them to create a really great product for our customers. Next slide, please. So University of California is really a unique and perfect example of a partner for Archaea Energy. I think the one thing that stands out to me is their intellectual curiosity when talking to them. I think the last conversation we had with them, we spent about an hour talking about nitrogen rejection units. And I think that's just a great example of how thoughtful they are in thinking about the success of a project and the reliability that they could get into their system. So I'd also say that what we really look for in partners, and this is what University of California is known for, is a true commitment to sustainability. So this is more than just kind of a corporate or in this case university slogan. They're really diving in, and you can tell by the way Sam was talking about his approach, really diving in to find the best and optimal way to meet their goals and considering all the costs. So they take a systems approach, just like we're doing. And the other thing that makes them a great partner is I think they've really done the math and taken that holistic approach to efficiency and determine that it makes sense to keep their existing natural gas infrastructure in place, particularly because it's non-intermittent and so critical, as Sam was talking about in the recent power outage. So if we can keep that reliable system in place, but replace the feedstock with renewable natural gas instead of fossil fuel natural gas, that would really be a good outcome for them. And they've done the math to determine what kind of value that has for them. So really an incredible partner. Sam's right. It is a long-term marriage, and so we're really trying to find folks like the University of California that have true commitment, are very thoughtful, appreciate the thoughtfulness that we bring to our projects, and are committed, to being our partners for a long period of time. And also, I just add one thing here that one of the great things about these projects that don't show up in the greenhouse gas sort of calculations is the improvement in local air quality that you get from one of these projects. So we're diverting H2S, VOCs, methane from going into that flare, and we're also incentivizing much improved collection efficiency at the landfill itself. So you're across most of our projects, you're seeing air pollution reductions over 70% across major pollutant categories, and that's really important to local communities and to local air quality. And that's not something that shows up in greenhouse gas reduction targets, but or sustainability metrics, but it's something that I think the University of California cares about, and it's something that we care about. So we're really looking forward to telling that story and making sure that they're proud of the work that we're doing at kind of the local level as well. Next slide. So I think, like University of California, we tried to identify some other kind of ideal or potential long-term partners of renewable natural gas. We really think that our best long-term partners are the folks that need to use natural gas as an important input into their energy system or into their manufacturing approach, and it really makes sense for them to not electrify that system or not replace the feedstock, but to instead purchase renewable natural gas over long-term contracts. So power and thermal, I think University of California is a perfect example of that. Industrial feedstocks, we're interested in talking to folks about RNG as a methanol feedstock. We're interested in talking to folks about RNG as ammonia feedstock, and as some of the technologies improve on using methane for renewable plastics, we're really interested in that potential emerging market as well. Hydrogen, we think that if you have kind of a need for that energy density that comes with natural gas, and you have the infrastructure in place for that fossil fuel natural gas, you kind of have two options. One is you buy renewable natural gas, or two is you get hydrogen and try to work it out into your system. So we are looking at renewable natural gas to hydrogen as well. And renewable natural gas could power electricity that could go into an electrolysis system, or it could also be used as an input into a steam methane reforming system. So we're looking at both of those opportunities, and excited about kind of very, very low carbon intensity, potentially very, very low carbon intensity fuel, with hydrogen being the output there. Then last bucket that we think about is kind of the transportation bucket. I think everyone is focused on RINs and LCFS credits and sort of traditional truck and car fleets using CNG. We see that as an interesting market, but we're also excited about LNG as a potential fuel for Class 8 trucks, or for that may be hybrid with electric, or for industrial transportation like shipping. There's several LNG cruise ships that have been announced, or locomotion. We're really excited about that, and hopefully that's something that could take off. So instead of purchasing LNG for one of those applications, or CNG, you could purchase renewable, compressed, or liquefied natural gas to further reduce your carbon intensity. Next slide. So I think this slide talks about really the overall demand and opportunity for renewable natural gas. We're of the opinion that, like sort of the four big categories that we talked about on the previous slide, that natural gas is critical for the foreseeable future. We're currently, the supply demand is relatively balanced at about 90 BCF a day, and if you add Canada into that, it's about or kind of North America broadly, it's a little over 100 BCF a day, I think. And we see that demand actually increasing over a couple categories between now and 2050. And we also see the largest users of natural gas need to decarbonize, and they need to decarbonize either by regulation or by kind of voluntary or corporate mandate, but they need to decarbonize. So if you're kind of committed to using natural gas and you also need to decarbonize, then renewable natural gas is an important consideration. We're of the opinion that we think that the market needs to, it's currently using less than 1% of renewable natural gas today as part of its kind of overall North American natural gas demand. We think that number probably needs to go up to about 15% if a lot of these large players that have stated that they need to decarbonize are really going to decarbonize. It's kind of two options. One, it's hydrogen, or one, it's renewable natural gas. And so we want to help them do that, and but it's going to be challenging to meet their potential demand. Next slide. So here we talk about that challenge. You know, while current RNG production is exploding, and you know, beyond 2021, you know, there's going to be more dramatic growth in renewable natural gas production. It still represents only a fraction of the potential demand of the market, we think. So if you add up even the utilities, for example, that may be under regulatory pressure to purchase renewable natural gas, you start looking at a supply-demand imbalance very quickly. And so what does that mean? It means that we need to develop more renewable natural gas. And and we need to do it probably in a different way that's cheaper, faster, you know, better efficiency, greener, right? And so if you add it up, for example, if you added up all the landfill gas that's, you know, currently being flared right now in the country or vented, I think you'd get to maybe a couple BCF a day. And so we're saying that that is not even, it's potentially not even close to the, you know, 5 to 10 year demand for renewable natural gas. And we need to unlock other markets of renewable natural gas and that haven't been considered as viable. So we can't wait for, you know, renewable identification numbers or LCFS credit pricing to increase to the point where these projects are economically viable. We have to do it on the cost side and by the efficiency of our approach. So we need to find a way to develop smaller flow projects, and that market opportunity is huge. And we also need to find a way to develop projects that, you know, may present more challenges. So in addition to smaller flows, maybe they're more difficult gas compositions, or maybe they have they're longer distances away from pipeline. So those are the things we're really committed to over a long period of time. Right now, we have some large landfill gas projects in our pipeline, but we're hoping to develop a manufacturing approach and a systems-wide approach that is able to make some of these smaller projects and more challenging projects more economical, that can get online faster to meet the demand of our potential customers. Next slide, please. So here I think we kind of reiterate some of the importance of you know, this supply-demand potential imbalance. You know, we think that we see utilities coming into the market pretty aggressively, particularly in the next 6 months, as potential buyers of long-term renewable natural gas or developers themselves. And so, you know, we do think we're in a, this is an important opportunity for our market, or for, you know, potential buyers of renewable natural gas to secure supply with the most predictable projects. And that's kind of my shameless plug as part of my presentation. But truthfully, I think it really represents what the kind of the power of renewable natural gas and how critical it is to existing infrastructures that are very difficult to change. They're difficult to electrify, and in some cases it doesn't make sense because of the intermittency. So RNG has a big role to play, and we're in a really unique period of time where we need to be focusing on accelerating as much RNG development as possible for our potential customers. Next slide, please. And so if you're interested in renewable natural gas, or if we'd love to talk to you about our pipeline and you know, potential projects or potential volumes that we have coming online. We'd love to also work with you on how to, you know, find the right kind of decarbonization partnership that makes sense. So we found that, you know, there are universities out there or particular utilities or municipalities that really want to do something local. And so, you know, we want to pull out the map of potential biogas opportunities, potential renewable natural gas opportunities, or decarbonization opportunities broadly, and think about how we can do that with you for a project that is really compelling on a local level, as well as giving you the volumes that you need to meet your long-term sustainability targets. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ellen. Thank you thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you more about this.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks again, Sam. We have had a number of questions come in during the presentation, so thanks to all of you in the audience for your engagement. You can continue to submit questions into the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel, which is on the lower right-hand side of your screen. I'll ask our first question, I think largely directed at Sam. We have folks who are interested in hearing how UC is cleaning up the gas, and also then what kinds of creative pricing structures would you consider as you're looking at these types of projects?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I guess clean up the gas is in reference to our Shreveport gas processing plant. So we have it's a multi-step process, and for people that are in the industry, it's going to sound pretty familiar. But there's a membrane, there's some polishing beds, there's a set of compressors. Some of the waste gas goes to a thermal oxidizer, and so it's, we have a pipeline spec for where we're injecting that we have to hit. So we take the inlet flow gas and analyze it, and then we have to run it through, again, the membrane, the polishing beds, and the other steps of the process, such that we're in compliance with the gas utility spec where we're injecting it. And then on the second part of the question, the pricing, again, we're open to a lot of different structures. UC, we're offering, generally 10 to 20-year contracts. And so I do have conversations with developers who want the spot price, which, makes sense when you look at it and it's high, but when it's low, nobody wants that either. So I think we are offering a really competitive market rate right now for kind of the pricing that's in line with, what maybe some of the other buyers out there are looking for. One example of kind of a structure that we've done before is if there's a certain volume of gas that, say, the gas rights owner or the developer wants to take to the spot market and kind of ride the RIN roller coaster on, that's great. UC is willing to take a smaller portion of the volume, or some portion of the volume, in order at a fixed price, and that can help with the debt financing side of the equation. So that's an example of a structure that we've used before. Obviously, there are infinite permutations on that, but I'd say it's worth getting in touch and reaching out if you want to explore some specific ideas, because we're always happy to have the conversation.
Great, thanks, Sam. And I've got a question for Nick now. Nick, folks are wondering, so usually when landfills don't have a gas collection and control system and just vent to the atmosphere, they don't contain a quality of methane high enough for an RNG project. Can you talk some about what types of systems Archaea has that you can utilize on these sites with sort of lower quantities or qualities of methane, and are RNG projects viable on these kinds of sites?
Yeah, the answer is yes, and I think we're really taking a holistic approach to all the different ways that we can make the project economical. So we're looking at CO2 sequestration in the 45Q as a really significant driver of long-term economics for those particular projects. So even though they might be smaller flows and maybe more of a challenging IB2 project on a standalone basis, they do present really impactful before and after greenhouse gas reduction on a metric ton of CO2 equivalent basis, because you're going from that venting state to RNG plus CO2 sequestration. So that's one thing. I think also it's important to note that NMOP testing, NSPS testing for tier 2 sites is not really a true kind of methane generation potential testing, and maybe an opportunity for the EPA to look at the sort of the true gas emissions of those sites, and whether the current approach of NMOP testing is really the right one.
Great, thanks. And I've got another question I think I'll ask you both to respond to. Do you have concerns about leakage, sort of both broadly, and then, Sam, when you guys are thinking about, your pathways and how RNG can be carbon neutral, how are you thinking about mitigating leakage concerns? And then, when we're actually out in the field, how do you keep your production and transmission systems tight?
It's a great question. So I'll take the first crack at it, but I really want to defer to Nick as the developer expert on the panel. But I guess there's sort of the boundary on the landfill, which I'm not going to speak about at Shreveport, but at the gas processing plants, we have a whole series of analyzers, and we do basically daily mass balance equations to make sure that the system is working, that there's no fugitive emissions, and we're looking to put in place some additional controls as well for monitoring any other potential leakage issues. So we're well aware of the concern and the potential global warming potential of methane, and that's exactly why we take it seriously and are always monitoring it. There's also the transmission, of course, through the pipeline system, and so we are very supportive of protocols that minimize the leaks, upgrade the infrastructure so that we don't have fugitive methane emissions that are worsening climate change. So I think I'll leave it at that and then pass it over to Nick to speak a little bit more in depth at what you all are doing at Archaea sites.
Sure. So this is a really interesting question, and it can be answered across a couple of different levels. One is, gas in to gas out methane recovery is totally critical, and it's not just sort of nameplate recovery. It's how that recovery is upheld when gas quality changes. So are you still able to achieve 90% or 95% methane recovery on a nitrogen injection unit if your inlet nitrogen is over 7%, as an example? Not a lot of NRU systems today can do that. But that's the challenge for our industry, is to maintain super high levels of methane recovery so we're not sending it to the flare by design. And then, so that's kind of one example, and you can take that example kind of across all the different processing systems in a high BTU plant. I think on the landfill gas collection efficiency and the pipelines, it's really interesting, and there needs to be more innovation there. I think collection efficiency. My take is collection efficiency across the country is low, is probably lower than we want to admit. I think the collection efficiency can be above 90% for a well field, no question. But I think that requires a really significant investment, either on the developer side or the landfill operator side, to constantly redrill wells. It has to be part of the annual maintenance capex budget of the plant. I think dewatering is really important. I think so as a landfill developer, we look forward to those opportunities where we can drive MMBTUs into our plant and ultimately towards our customers. But it does require probably more investment than the industry is making, and also more technology. So things like remote monitoring on wellheads I think are very promising. Things like using drones for sort of a surface emission scan that could be done instead of on a quarterly basis based on NSPS, but maybe on a daily basis. So you could real time understand your opportunities for improved collection efficiency, and I think those same approaches could be taken to pipelines as well. You're seeing satellite imagery start to pop up of landfills and using satellite sensing to come up with potential fugitive emissions. So it's something that we're going to have to, as an industry, get ahead of, because that data will be public, and it'll be very eye-opening in terms of the opportunity for greenhouse gas reduction.
Thanks, Nick. And I've got a few technical questions that I'll just lob quickly at you. Folks wondering how you define large versus small projects in terms of, just cubic square
Sure.
feet, and also what the minimum flow of landfill gas that makes sense for Archaea is.
So we've done projects, or we're looking at projects as low as kind of 1,000 SCFM as an inlet. It's, again, you can see how we're looking at projects. It's pretty comprehensive. So it's not always that like a vented methane project, for example, might have different opportunities economically that just a standalone 1,000 SCFM project would have. So that needs to be taken into account. I think on a kind of a pure play, what's economical on a high BTU basis, I think traditionally the industry has said, sub 2,000 SCFM is really challenging economically. And then there's been differences of opinions based on, RIN pricing. So RIN price is very high today. Folks are going to jump into smaller flow projects, sub 2,000 SCFM projects, and it'll make sense in their models. But, if RIN prices change, maybe they'll be in a tough spot. So we like to use a very conservative price assumption, something that is in line with our targets for delivering RNG to our long-term offtake partners, and really try to determine if a project is economic based on those prices, and try to do it by getting costs down or by developing ancillary opportunities like the CO2 sequestration that I talked about. So to answer your question, we think that we need to play in the sub 2,000 SCFM space more, and ultimately we need to get down below 1,000 SCFM. So we need to be able to make a project work at 500 SCFM. Maybe it's a municipal wastewater treatment plant that has, and maybe that project is even far away from pipe. So that's really where we need to get to on a cost basis. We're not quite there yet. But I think we have a roadmap to be able to develop those projects in the future.
Thanks, Nick. And Sam, can you talk a little bit about how the sort of source and the feedstock of the RNG, landfill gas, AD gas, wherever that's coming from, impacts UC's decision on sort of who to source from and how you're prioritizing where you're sourcing your gas?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we go and look at projects, there's a number of filters. I alluded to one of them at the top, which is we have a regulatory requirements per ARB's cap and trade rules from AB 32 to get cap and trade eligible gas. And there's an additionality test in that. So that's really the first scan. And then in addition to that, for our carbon neutrality reporting, we report through a voluntary protocol from the climate registry. And there's a series of protocols having to do with biomethane associated with that. And then we look at sort of the financials of the project. And, again, we're working to decarbonize and reach carbon neutrality using biomethane that is fiscally responsible. And so we're going to need to think about, what makes sense. Right now, biomethane is still very expensive, right? It's 4 or 5x the cost of fossil natural gas. And it's an important investment that we want to make, but we need to do so in a way that is not encumbering students with more tuition dollars, for example. And then finally, we look at the community impacts, and Nick alluded to some of this as well, right? Are there opportunities for odor mitigation or waste reduction or minimizing criteria air pollutants by taking flared gas and putting it into the pipe? And so, we look at all those things, and then we assess sort of the development partner and whether we think we can build that long-term relationship. So anything that kind of falls out of that scan and checks those boxes, we're happy to pursue. So historically for UC, that has mostly been flared landfill gas, flared or vented, or it's been anaerobic digester projects where, say, there's source separated organics that are now being put right into an AD, and it's consistent with, say, the state of California's SB 1383 goal, waste reduction goal, and so it makes total sense and it's a win-win. That's not to say those are the only feedstocks. So, for example, I could imagine a woody waste gasification project, right, where we're taking some of the millions of dead trees that have perish because of climate change and beetle infestation in the Sierra Nevada. And if those are removed in a ecologically sound way, and we can do the due diligence around it, and it checks the other boxes, those are the types of projects we'd also be excited to pursue. So short answer is we're sort of agnostic to feedstock, but we have some other regulatory, financial, and compliance criteria that we use to look at every project, and that really drives the decision on what we buy and when and where.
Great, thanks. And I'll direct our final question back over to Nick. Nick, you talked about gas separation as a continued need for R&D. Could you talk a little bit about sort of what methane capture processes and efficiencies are currently typical during your upgrading operations, and what kinds of methane capture efficiencies we might expect to see in the future?
Sure. Great question. Some of which I'm going to not say, and just say we're working on a few things. But I think I can talk generally about some things that are currently done in the market and that are exciting. So on kind of our phase 1 projects that we're developing, we're using very proven technologies. The two main kind of separation systems, I think, are from a kind of a cost and importance perspective, or CO2 separation, and their CO2 separation membranes that our team has worked quite a lot on are really critical, and they work very well. They work for a long time. There's not a lot of mechanical manipulation that's required. They can operate without a lot of manual adjustment, which is great. And those have today current versions of membrane separation process, whether it's a 2-stage membrane system or a 3-stage membrane system, are above 95% methane recovery. So they're getting very good and very high, and there's kind of next stage polymers that different vendors are excited about that are maybe offering higher selectivity or higher methane recovery as well. So that seems to be CO2 separation with membrane seems to be an important part of the future. Nitrogen removal is a real pain. I don't think our industry has found a great way to do it. At scale, we're excited about on some of our larger projects. We have a 20,000 SCFM project that we're working on right now. We're working with a cryogenic distillation process that we're really excited about with a really proven great vendor there. And that's offering very high methane recovery. And but it's not something that historically has been able to have been scaled down and scaled down to the point where it still works in terms of meeting O2 spec on pipelines, or having kind of higher than pressure swing adsorption methane recoveries, or it makes sense from a cost perspective or energy intensity perspective. So I'd say that the cryogenic distillation technology is really interesting on the nitrogen side. TBD on how it can be done on the smaller scale. I think pressure swing adsorption still seems really promising to me across whether it's across VSC siloxane removal, as well as nitrogen and oxygen removal. I think there's a lot of emerging technologies on adsorbents that are really interesting. So MOFs, molecular imprinted polymers, ways that we can get kind of more selective at lower potential ideal pressures with adsorbent medias are very exciting to think about.
Definitely. All right, well, thank you. Nick and Sam will wrap up for today.